Okay, so now we are going to start the next
Presentation.
presentation, and that is by Dr. Bhavani Shankar Naik. The chapter is on political economy of development in Odisha. So it's over to Dr. Bhavani.
Thank you, Amrendra. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thanks for inviting me. Um, Dr. Jatin Naik laid a very good foundation for my talk on political economy. Um, Political economy of development in Odisha appears to be a contested space because we have different forces in work and we are yet to understand their philosophical foundations, their historical lineages, and we are yet to design the ideological framework of the debate. We continue to follow the Eurocentric narratives on political economy. Jatin sir was talking about what a man of literature can do. Actually, a man of literature can destroy political economy. The Descartes duality destroyed political economy, reduced it to the duality between economic growth and economic development, growth versus development debate by Bhagavati and Sen. These debates has its origin from the Eurocentric narrative. This Eurocentric narrative destroyed the emancipatory foundation of political economy. The Descartes duality shaped the debates based on the requirements of the Westphalian ideology, Westphalian state, and that Westphalian state today continues to dominate our debates on political economy of development. Um, so if you locate 1648, which is the beginning of the um, Treaty of Westphalia, and that Treaty of Westphalia laid the foundation stone for nation states in Europe. In the name of peace, they consolidated the foundations of capital in Western Europe. And today, the new nation states that emerged in the world through anti-colonial struggles, the nation states in Africa, Latin America, in America itself, in Asia, all these states today are Westphalian states. When you see that Ambani's wealth is rising in an unimaginable scale, whereas a poor person's net income declines on everyday basis because the state stands behind the corporates today. That's the foundation of Westphalian ideology. What happened in Europe? You will see the Modi-led India, the Modi-led government, or the previous governments stood behind corporate capital. And therefore, the political economy and its emancipatory logic through development gets marginalized within the debates. So the whole idea of essence and emancipation of political economy through development, um, when we interrogate this idea of essence and emancipation, whose essence it is, who decides this essence, the basic needs of people for a dignified life, who decides the basic needs? Is it the state? Is it the government or the people? So we are yet to find a place in terms of ideological formulations where people decide their development narratives. The development narratives we have, that Eurocentric development narratives, their, their foundation is to create a desire-based society by destroying a need-based society. So desires can be scientific, desires can be fictitious. American dream is a fictitious desire which promotes capitalist culture, capitalist models of development in the name of prosperity, in the name of peace. If you locate WTO, it says there are 10 good points of international trade. And that international trade, the whole approach of international trade after the rise of newly independent states incorporated the modern nation states in Asia, Africa, and Latin America within the Eurocentric framework. We call it globalization, liberalization, privatization, name it anything. It destroyed the very foundation of people's livelihood. So here in this chapter, what I'm trying to do, I'm creating a kind of ideological foundation of political economy of development in Odisha. I call it pluriversal political economy. Pluriversal political economy is people's political economy. What are the needs of Oriya people? What are the needs of people in Kalahandi, Koraput, Kendrapada, in Bhubaneswar? Let people decide. So when we are talking about the visions of Orissa, we need to really have a new narrative, move away from the debate between economic growth and development. These debates are not our debates. We did not design this debate. We are not active participants in that debate. We are not driving the debate. We are subjects. We are not even citizens of that debate. So therefore, it is important to understand the combined and uneven development in Orissa by creating an ideological framework based on pluriversal foundation. Why European political economy reduced political economy to essence and emancipation? Why this duality? Because once you create a mass essence, mass needs, you can really have one company producing your breakfast for everyone else. You can have one McDonald's, one KFC, which will provide you snacks and whatever you want to have during your afternoon time. So the whole project is to defend capital, destroy community ownership over resources, destroy people's independent livelihoods, destroy cultures of consumption by creating consumerism. That's a fundamental difference between consumerism and cultures of consumption. Cultures of consumption is based on local production, local needs, whereas consumerism is mass production where market decides what breakfast you will take, what shampoo you will use, what soap you will use, what will be the color of your bathroom. Sir was talking, what his misfit. Actually, literature designs advertisement industry, which helps in transforming political economy in a massive scale. For example, Edward Verner's Propaganda. The book was published in 1921, I think. That book led to the transition of global capitalism. So anyway, that's a different debate. I don't want to get into it, but we can have a discussion at the end. So to understand the essence of people, we need to map out what are the impediments people face to access their immediate essence, immediate necessities. What are the impediments for their emancipation from their everyday trauma, from food, from education to health? What are the basic trauma people face in our state? Once you do not know, once you know what are the impediments, you can address them through policy making. You can frame policies. I'm not a pro-Chinese in any case of imagination. It is the intellectuals based in Chinese Academy of Social Science which designs policies, which frames the ideological narratives the Communist Party of China implements, whether they implement democratically or on authoritarian processes. It is up to the Chinese people to fight and argue whether it's right or wrong. But it is the intellectuals, Chinese intellectuals, those who shape the debates in China and their development trajectory. So therefore, it is important for us as intellectuals, particularly I'll address to the young students here, if you are doing research, disengage with politicians and bureaucrats. These are absolutely a nuisance in any academic conference. If you want to create a vision, work independently and work as a critic by looking at the everyday realities of people. So this is where I'll move to my paper, particularly looking at the centralized federal structure helps capitalism to expand to the peripheral places, the whole Eurocentric approach of dividing development based on north and south, based on center and periphery. These arguments are not valid anymore. Why? Because in every city, you will find north and south. In every country today, you will find north and south. If you go to London, you will find north and south. That's an underdeveloped east, that is a developed west. Highest number of golf courses are there in west of London and south of London. East of London is ghettoized by the working class people. And they're not choosing to be in that ghetto. We call them working class ghetto. Same in Chicago. There's a brilliant book called American Project. You will see how black people are being ghettoized through development process in a city of Chicago, how capitalism creates these narratives by calling them as unemployed, lazy people, drug addicts, or criminals. The way we brand our slum dwellers in Odisha, the people, those who clean your city, they live in inhuman conditions in slums. If you do not design political economy, if you do not design ideological frameworks which provides dignity, citizenship rights to your most marginalized people, it is impossible to have a vision. And whether it is 100 years of Orissa or 200 years of Orissa, we will be following the same narrative designed by our colonizers. So when it comes to Orissa's political economy, it is shaped by the development narratives as outlined by the Indian Constitution, as outlined by the Indian federal structure. Indian federalism and its centralized visions created a political economic process which shaped the neoliberal development processes in Orissa, particularly when it comes to, if you look at the records of Indian federal structure and the debates within the Constituent Assembly, you will find that the particularly I was trying to locate one of the debate where it says the it clearly says that just give me a second, I need to find it. Yes, it is on 5th of July 1947, the second report of the Union Powers Committee. It says that it would be injurious to the interests of the country to provide for a weak central authority which will be incapable of ensuring peace and coordinating vital matters of common interest. That the soundest framework of our constitution is a federation with a strong center. That strong center helps Modi to design policies and drive our debate on Hindi, and Hindu nationalism. That's a Hindu bias. There's a professor from Oxford Brookes called Pritam Singh who wrote a book called Indian Federalism and Capitalism, where he outlines how there's a Hindu bias within Indian constitution, how the centralized project of the Indian federal structure helps capitalism to expand in a way that is detrimental for the citizenship rights and the development of people. Similarly, if you look at different frameworks of Indian federalism, it facilitates capital today. So I started by saying the Eurocentric foundation of political economy destroyed the emancipatory project of political economy because today the Indian state, forget about the nature of Indian state as outlined in the Constitution of India, in the preamble to the Constitution of India. Indian state is as Westphalian as British state, as American state. So the state today is not standing behind people, but behind the corporations. Therefore, while designing the vision for Odisha, we need to focus on people's political economy. And the people's political economy should emerge from people's needs. And what are the impediments they face in realizing their everyday needs, realizing their emancipatory trajectories? That's the only way we can democratize our feudal social structures, established by Brahminical social order, established by caste structures. Similarly, if you locate the economic reforms and you locate the progress of Orissa or development of Orissa, in every sector there is a decline of Orissa's economic growth or economic development. I really don't want to separate development from growth because they emerge from the same ideological framework. And the so-called development process, follows economic growth. Economic growth follows development patterns. And in the name of empowering people, we empower corporates. Exactly what Edward Bernays did to American youth by saying, before 1920, female population, American women were not smoking tobacco. So Edward Bernays started, projecting that smoking is empowerment. Women started smoking in America, and tobacco companies, tobacco needs, tobacco market expanded in a massive scale. Similarly, the whole development project today is like a tobacco It doesn't empower people, it empowers Ambanis and other Adanis. If you look at different sectors of Odisha, particularly agriculture, you will find, in comparison to the production in the rest of country, Odisha's agricultural production has declined during the post-reform period. The contribution of agriculture to the net state domestic production declined from 67% from the past 50 years, 5 decades, to 30% during 1998, and it has further declined as well. So similarly, if you locate industries, the current government follows the policies of the Congress party. Janik Patnaik government said, they will have their central vision was to create 1,000 industries in 1,000 days, and that policy continues to echo in Navin Patnaik government. And in spite of political transition, there is no policy transition in Odisha. So it continues to follow a political economy project led by mining-led industrialization, which extract resources without making people shareholders of their own resources. Actually, by using modern technology, if you extract resources, make tribals or whoever stays in those mining areas as shareholders of those mining, those resources, and if you really want to develop people and develop the society, make people shareholders of industrialization, and protect environment by using technology, modern technology of industrialization. We have resources. We need to mobilize them for our own development, but we cannot follow the Eurocentric model of development, which destroyed local communities in Durham, in Ireland. I was talking to Professor Naik about rise of crime. There was no crime in Yorkshire before privatization of land. Privatization, actually land is the first commodity to be privatized in England. And then, we see privatization of land in the rest of the world. And with the privatization of land, there was a rise of crime. If you look at, the development model today in Odisha or in India, it is similar. It is the violent structural process that produces marginalization, produces crime, and the law doesn't really provide any safety nets to the poor, but provides safety nets to the capital. And economic reform programs laid the foundation of that policy framework. Similarly, if you look at microeconomic conditions, you will find that there is unbalanced economic growth during the post-economic reform period, because most of the policy processes, or institutions of development in Odisha are fundamentally controlled by people who are higher class and higher class. I was in a meeting with All Odisha Lawyers Association where the chief minister was there. There were 3 ministers. He did not speak to them. One of the ministers was from the tribal area. And chief minister did not even locate any of these people. And these are the people who shape our policies. These are the people who shape our destiny on everyday life. So when we talk about political economy of development, we need to see the political processes. It is the political process that drives economic development, that drives social justice, that drives economic justice, that creates framework for egalitarian development processes. Look at the other sectors like employment, poverty, health, education. You'll find that we have a strong urban bias in terms of our investment strategy, in terms of our infrastructure strategy. Sir was talking about a few districts. Those districts continue to be the most developed districts in Odisha, and in Bhubaneswar continues to expand without the expansion of people, without the expansion of people's needs, and nothing this government does to empower people in terms of their livelihoods. If you look at most of the time, actually, when we say we enter into the debate between development and underdevelopment, all political parties, irrespective of their ideological framework, they blame central negligence and natural calamities in Odisha. If you really look at the data, Odisha's economic growth did not decline during any of the natural calamities. It has affected people's livelihood, but economic growth did not decline. So therefore, the whole Eurocentric approach that that will be trickle down, it's a fraud concept, and we continue to follow it till today. Similarly, if you look at central negligence, there is a fundamental um, reason to believe in central negligence. Again, it's a political process. Our political leaders, those who go to the parliament, they're unable to articulate the interest of our state, interest of our people. So therefore, you see that government of India is spending on education, road, communication per person is very high in other states than Odisha. Take Delhi, for example, Uttaranchal, Himachal Pradesh, West Bengal. West Bengal actually is 6.17% higher than the state than Odisha. So so there is a central negligence, and that central negligence again, most of the political parties say, "Oh, we are neglected by the center, therefore we are unable to develop ourselves. Our economy is poor." When no, the new argument is we are no more part of the Bimaru state. This is a new argument from the ruling class. So what what kind of educational infrastructure you have in Utkal University? What kind of educational infrastructure you have by constructing administrative building, writing the in capital letter? You don't develop education. When the administrative building of any university is bigger than the library, that shows the unfounded priorities of the planners for development. Similarly, your schools, your colleges, I'm a product of this state. When you see and compare, you will see how lopsided development drives our destinies on everyday basis. So what should we do? I go back to the twin projects of political economy. The essence, the basic needs of people for a dignified living. Who decides our everyday needs? What should we consume? What should we produce? Who will decide? Is it the state or the market? So most of the time we see it is the market supported by the state decides what to consume. Some of the things I consume today in Bhubaneswar, when I was a student, it was not there. When I was a student in Utkal University, there was a sense of affiliation with my rural consumption background. But today, the things I consume, they're not being produced in Odisha. The chickens are supplied by Andhra Pradesh. The potatoes come from Bengal. The local production is being destroyed. I come from Rajkanika when Sir was talking about 64 different types of tax by the Kalinga king. If you buy a slipper, you pay tax. If you marry, you pay the tax. If you have an umbrella, you pay the tax. You pay the road tax. You pay the bicycle tax. You pay the radio tax. When you sleep with your wife for the first time after marriage, you pay the tax. So there were 64 different types of tax documented by an ODI writer called Praful Das. If you find time to read Kanika's history, it's well documented. So the kind of combined and uneven development we experience as citizens of this state, as citizens of this place, it is a product of a process. We did not choose it. The day we choose our political economy, the day we design the ideological frameworks of the theoretical frameworks of political economy, will create a better vision for a better Odisha, for a better tomorrow. And Odisha's internationalism is amazing. Sir was talking about language. If you are in Paris, if you don't speak French, you will be isolated. You feel lonely. There are very few people who will talk to you. There are people. There are good people all over the world. If you are in any parts of non-English speaking Western Europe, you feel vulnerable. In Orissa, whether you speak the language or not, it's okay. So that's a sense, that's a liberating sense in a way, because the place is accommodating, the place is even spiritually speaking, I'm an atheist. I have nothing to do with Lord Jagannath. We say it's Lord of the world. We don't say it's our Lord. It's not our Ram, our Jagannath. It belongs to the world. So the sense of internationalism, the sense of accommodating culture, is our asset. But in terms of reactionary social structures like caste, gender, gender-based social structures, patriarchy, these are impediments to our development process. To dismantle, to create a new narrative, we need to dismantle these reactionary social structures. You cannot create an egalitarian political economy of development without dismantling reactionary social, cultural, political structures. That's very, very important. And it should be part of the vision. It doesn't matter whether you have numbers or not. Statistics lie. And when I was really poor in numbers, my father used to joke that numbers are fool's man's science. So you can play with numbers. My father did just 12th class. His sense of mathematics is far better than me, and I'm always jealous of his education. And he's very proud of his Jesuit education by RN High School. He was a student in RN High School set up by Konica King, and he was saying very limited people should have access to education because it produces rebels in Konica. So we really need to create rebels through our educational systems, by which we can create a political economy which will be accessible and available to all without any form of exploitation or any form of inequality. Without having access to equal health, education, educational infrastructure, other forms of infrastructure, you cannot imagine just development, egalitarian development. We'll continue to have unequal development. In spite of capitalist Britain, think about health. If I have a heart attack tomorrow, I don't need to really think about how much money I have in my account. I need to call an ambulance. Ambulance will reach maximum within 12 minutes. Anywhere you live in London, every region has its own place. It again during pandemic it collapsed because there was a massive source of virus. But in normal times, at least I have access to critical healthcare or everyday needs of my health without thinking about money. So here, if you live in Bhubaneswar, you need to check your wallet or insurance before you think about accessing good health. Our, with limited infrastructure, capital hospital is good, doctors are good, but can you access it? How many? You just go to AMs, you'll see how long the queues are. People are sleeping on the roadside to access healthcare. So we need to really have a holistic approach. Holistic, I don't mean I don't mean in a religious sense, but holistic in terms of inclusive and integral development process by focusing on people's political economy of development. With these words, let me end my talk. I'm happy to take questions and clarify some of the statements I have made. And again, before I end, I thank everyone for your time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question, yes.
Uh, You mentioned that Indian federalism facilitates capitalism. You just explain that a bit.
But it sounds also like an oxymoron, right? Centralized federalism. No, it's not centralized federalism.
Yeah.
So it's like an oxymoron, right? But like centralized and again federalism, and then that facilitates again capitalism. So
Yeah. So it's actually quite well established if you read constitutional debates and the documents around Union Powers Committee reports. Union Powers Committee report, they started documenting from 1935 onwards. If you locate those documents up to 1947, it clearly says that decentralized federal structure is going to create a weak state. Therefore, we need a strong, I quote the committee reports here. It says it would be injurious to the interest of the country to provide a weak central authority which will be incapable of ensuring peace, of coordinating vital matters of common concern. That the soundest framework of our constitution is a federation with a strong center. That, that shows that historically, the way colonizers wanted a centralized system, we literally accommodated those centralized structures within our constitution. And again, if you read Pritam Singh's books on federalism, he clearly shows the debates in detail, where he argues that centralized structures within Indian federal system, Indian federal constitution, and I also outline here in the chapter written around, it's a rough draft, I can send it to you. Locate everything from planning to investment, from banking. You'll find there's a centralized tendency in every policy frameworks we have in India. So yes, it is. It facilitates capital because capitalism cannot handle decentralized structures.
So what you are suggesting is that India should not have like central state as such that we have today.
Yeah.
And we should have like United States to America kind of model where states have more autonomy and more rights to do whatever they do.
Absolutely. I'm not saying you should follow American or British model. We need to create our own model. Again, I read the Constitutional Assembly debates. The communist and socialist members of the Constitutional Assembly vehemently opposed the idea of centralized federalism in India, argued for a decentralized federal structure by keeping people's need at the center of policymaking and governance. So that debate was completely erased in the planning process. That debate was not adopted as policy.
Actually, I have to feel confident that when you talk about consumerism, like you are telling the market decide actually what to do. But at the same time, for example, if I take an example in a certain market, like idli is available, burger is available, that particular person is decide whether you will eat idli or burger. So when like continuously you eat burgers, then that is actually capitalist. It become like more capitalist economy instead of like developing the local product. So this is the first one. Second point, that when you are telling that when you do the policies, you should be discerning into the politics. But what really happening that since when one party get actually majority, so whatever he wants actually does. Even if like for example, if Modi wants something today, even if you have like he has majority and he does not care what the people are thinking, you have to adapt it. So in the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, that is passed and that become law. So like actually we are talking something like this document we are making and we'll give to government, but in reality that is not happening. Can you throw some light? What can be the way out to like to avoid the reality?
Thank you. I think you have two separate comments. The first part is around consumerism. There's a culture of consumption. Culture of consumption is democratic. You like spicy food based on if you go to Guntur, the kind of spicy chili curry they eat, we cannot eat. When I went to Hyderabad Central University, I was sick for 3 months because it was super spicy food in the hostels. I could not really digest. So people eat based on their local production, and local production shapes their outlooks towards consumption. And this is not just case of India. This was happening all over the world. You will find the consumer culture is very different in Scotland, in Scottish Highlands. Edinburgh's consumer needs, consumer culture is very different from consumer culture in Glasgow. Similarly, you'll find North England is very different from South England. Similarly, in Odisha also you have North-South divisions in terms of our food habits. Our food habits are different because of local consumption needs. I'm from Kendrapada, from Kanika. We never had roti. We always had rice. Okay? So today, if you go to my village, none eat rice. So we used to get up with dosa. We call it pitha in Odia. But today, if you get up, you'll see that most of the people in my village eat roti. the transition of consumption is not by choice. It is fundamentally, it was fundamentally created. You know, there's a very good documentary called Century of the Self. If you watch that documentary, you will see how consumption patterns are being changed consciously as a project to facilitate food corporations, to facilitate capitalism, to facilitate mass production. Similarly, you know, if you really see how the modern capitalism deals with this, uh, deals with this diversity by creating a monolithic culture of consumption. We call it as mass production, mass consumer culture. McDonald's gives very different food in Glasgow from London. Go to McDonald's in US, any part of US, and go to McDonald's in South India, McDonald's in Delhi. The taste of your burger is very different. They sprinkle some chili powder in Chennai McDonald's, whereas in Delhi you don't have a sprinkle of chili powder. Similarly, McDonald's deals with religion quite well. McDonald's in Dubai, they're very different, or in Pakistan they're very different. So while accommodating the local needs, capitalism managed to transform the diversity of consumer needs to a monolithic structure. When it comes to a second argument, a second point on political processes, I gave example of China, not to emulate China, but how intellectuals in China do it. I'm not saying it's an ideal model. No way we should adopt Chinese model of development. But if you look at Chinese Academy of Social Science, see the debates they're driving. They drive the debate by keeping people in mind. They drive the debate based on Chinese needs. The good, bad, or ugly, I'm not making a value judgment. The intellectuals of China shape the political discourse, policy discourse of development for their country. So in Odisha, we need to, when I say disengage with politicians, I don't say disengage with political process. You engage with political process to create a people's political economy where politics drives the market, drives the development, drives the economic growth, where you can redistribute the outcomes to the people for an egalitarian social project. So we cannot really disengage with politics.
Okay,
So,
Professor
yeah.
Mr. Al-Sharia, please.
Thank you for this presentation. I believe that political economic processes will not only be determined by the accumulative logic of big capital, but also through the process of it will be at least influenced by the process of articulation from the class processes in a political economy understanding of development, characterization of classes and class processes. I hope that we believe in that proposition would be central to understand the outcome. Now, from that perspective, how do you see the emerging classes, affluent classes, the richer sections of the society? Political economic terms, one way is to describe them as local capitalists trying to find a space within the structure of global capitalism. But also they could be thought of as basically a rentier class or a class of subordinated capitalists who just want to act as a middleman rather than as an agent of even capitalist structure. So I was thinking that will it not be good to engage with this changing, although that's a very ambitious thing to ask for, but in a chapter, but at least some thoughts on how the class structure in Odisha has got transformed, particularly since India has taken.
Thank you, Deepak. I think we have a long-standing debate between Deepak and me, and it's a very comradely debate. One of the problems we have, when I was talking about Descartes and duality, and how it dismantled the wider scope of political economy. Um, my my fundamental problem is with the way European Marxists also followed the Descartesian duality. Marxism was an emancipatory ideological framework emerging from Europe and emerging from the industrial Europe. Marxism did not follow Descartesian duality. It challenged it by talking about dialectics. The method of dialectics, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, was a challenge to the duality. But when it comes to the political project led by Lenin, Lenin reduced it to class and anti-class. And when it comes to class struggle, it's not just about class struggle of the industrial working class, a class struggle of marginalized people, irrespective of their gender, caste, class backgrounds. So what I do in my chapter, I talk about the nature of state, nature of the society, nature of the individuals, how these three ideals have changed within the process of development we experienced in India and in Odisha. The second argument, one of the problem I have with categorization, rentier class, propertied class, fundamentally I oppose to this categorization. Categorization is very Eurocentric, you know. I understand the differences. There is a fundamental difference between a working class person, propertied class, landowning class, rentier class, and so on. But my problem is, I do not want to reduce class to a category. Class is a relationship. Class is a relationship with everyday life and everyday realities of people. So if you locate class in a wider perspective, it will be much more inclusive. Of course, you need this categorization to understand the dynamics of capital, that varieties of capitalism argument emanating from Europe
Can
again.
I just interrupt
Yeah.
for a second? I was not speaking from a perspective of class exclusiveness. I am speaking from the project which you yourself said that there is a need for an alternative vision that articulates the people's political economy. One of the fundamental roadblocks that I see in that for that project is the emergence of a, let us forget about Marxian notion of class for a moment, of a class of relatively prosperous for middle class people negotiating between global capital or national capital and the local resources, exercising overwhelming power over the local social political processes. So from that perspective, if we don't characterize, understand, unpack these class relations, and not at all in a reductionist sense. It is not in opposition to gender or anything else. But that from a very pragmatic perspective also. If we do not understand the politics and the politics of power exercised by this class, a lot of other things which we are saying, I'm digressing again. For example, the question that was asked about federalism. Creation of Jharkhand didn't stop the access of Indian capitalists to the mines of Jharkhand. Rather, I think the prices of bribe, the price of bribe came down because now these are smaller leaders that can be handled well. So all I'm saying is that unless we understand the class basis, the class processes, class exercise, class broadly defined, not exclusively the traditional notion of property-based class, in whatever way we decide, the power of this class is central to understand the understanding of contemporary Odisha and also the prospects of imagining a different that in that sense.
Absolutely. Like in 1952, Institute of Development Studies in Sussex started a program called Village Study Program. Village Study Program was a counter to the Planning Commission projects. It was trying to create an alternative model of planning based on the needs of people living in the villages, led by Professor Biplab Das Gupta. So what I'm arguing here, we need to really define the essence of people. Amarendra stays in Bhubaneswar. What Amarendra needs to realize his or her goals? What are the needs of tribal people? A need-based approach and that need-based approach should not be very reductionist need-based approach. It's not just about house and food and clothes and all, education and health. Typical development economics argue or a dignified citizenship or an empowered citizenship. What are the essence of person living in Koraput? If you want to exploit the natural resources on which a tribal person's house sits. I keep giving this example. I bought a share of Vedant to fight Vedant in London. So every general body meeting of shareholders, I go to the meeting and shout. And I felt tired and a bit frustrated ideologically, and then stopped going and sold out the Vedant share. So if I can buy Vedant share and my money expands with the expansion of Vedant share in the market, why can't we make the people of Hollandia be the shareholders of those mining resources? Utilize. So what I'm trying to say, we move away from the categorization. Categorization, again, there are lots of philosophical literature, both from Marxist and liberal economics and philosophers, looking at how categorization is reductionist. For example, if you categorize me, am I a jazz lover or a whiskey drinker? Am I a lover of cricket or a football club lover? What would be my identity? Or combination of all? You understand? So that's why I think a need-based approach will be good to design the future vision. And, that's where you locate people's need.
I agree with that actually. With regard to in class, and I would add to that class. I have, since I also do political economy, I believe that understanding Odisha's political economy entails. But basically, what presented is like kind of obtuse situation. This is how we imagine the political economy has to be. But however, we are in a very different kind of a stage. Now, who is going to set the agenda? How the political economy will look like? First of all, Odisha is the only state perhaps in the entire country where people don't have stake. By which I mean, this is the only state where dominance, the caste and class dominance, has not been challenged as it has been done in other states. And that is one of the fundamental drivers of aspiration. What should you be having in the agenda of development? You look at Jharkhand, at least Adivasi is the stakeholder. Chhattisgarh, all these newly created states, though they are small and manageable, politically very tenuous and stuff like that, has been done with regard to the political economy of this center to encash the rich mineral that is there. But at least they have power now to set their agenda, which is not the case in Odisha. So I believe that political economy of development in Odisha should, in a way or other, factor in these things. First is what is the political ideology of ruling elites, which she was talking about. And obviously, ruling elites are not only, so to say, class driven, it is highly caste as well.
Yeah.
Because it is highly, and this has been like literature wise very much proven by Benjamin Monty and his allies. And even working that, this Brahman current, kind of a centric, political central. You look at BJD Congress, there is no difference as such. And hence we didn't see any kind of formidable, challenges arising in the political scenario at least. That is also not happening in this. You go to BJP, there is some Patnaik. You go to BJD, there is a Patnaik. You go to Congress, there is a Patnaik. So it's like Patnaik, it's there omnipresent. Less than 1% of the population are ruling everything, and their idea of development is people's idea of development. Point one. Second thing, the development processes that entailed, especially after 80s and with the rise of Janki Vallabh that 1,000 industries in 1,000 days, that in a way marginalized the people's aspiration. And that was the first time that the inroads have been made into the private territories, which was until then at least state driven. We have RSP and stuff like that. But we know, and that is the literature, that is a fact of the day, that in Odisha more than 20 plus people's movement are challenging the development paradigm that state is following. And the Kundan Kumar Swamp, and if you listen to Professor Samantha and people like that, Now there are big kind of, I'm talking about people's protest. Like not a small group of people. Look at Kasipur, look at Niyamgiri, look at Pukso, look at Rajpi, look at anywhere. Now Bapri Mali is the center of this thing. So how we are going to factor in while we're talking about the political economy of development in Odisha? And the last thing, and that is something that is going to be politically very, very tenuous, and something that I asked yesterday as well. With the vision, like Odisha completing, 100 years of its, making. Now many things are actually coming out. The contradiction, which was like nicely kept under the carpet, is now started surfacing. First is the regional question, which was there now, but what we see in last couple of months back, all the Western Odisha people now they started demanding coastal in a big scale, which was not the case before. So that is there. So now the coastal and so to say north and Western Odisha and Southern Odisha divide is becoming more prominent, and it is creeping in now, in the state politics, and that is the region we see a lot of money being pumped in that area. So this regional disparity is also factoring in. So that is thing, and with that, the another process is that is taking place in Odisha, to my knowledge at least, is the aspiration of Dalit and Adivasi, because you can't actually develop Odisha unless pulling these people out of the poverty line, and they make 40% of the total population. And in fact, surprisingly, mining jo jaga rahi hai, wherever it is, poverty has deepened there, and this is the official NSSO data. You compare 2004 and 2011, and then 1993 to 2004. I was looking, this southern state poverty was 70%, it has gone to 90%, and that is while keeping in PDS into account. I'm just like, these are my ideas of political economy.
I think
we
you
should,
need
I
to
think, factor in all these things.
Do you need to really respond to
I
this?
think
we
I
have-
agree with both
so-
Professor Misra
So I'm
and
saying this because you have
Pankaj.
already
I don't think
overstood the time.
I don't think I have any disagreement with you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do it differently,
Yeah,
in a different orientation. I completely agree with you.
In fact, just to add to it, now Professor Kishore Samal, in fact, he made a statement in a very public lecture that when the history of Odisha will be written, particularly the independent Odisha, that which dynasty ruled Odisha? It is the Patnaik dynasty who have ruled. So after those kings, Kharagala, or say Gajapati, or whoever, it's the Patnaik dynasty that has ruled. Anyways, I think we'll now move to the next session. Professor Keshav Das. I will invite Professor Keshav Das. But you see, now my concern is that we are having very quality discussion, and we also don't want to miss that. But on the other hand, covering all the chapters. So one way we can do that is we all are here, so we can continue till late evening. Doesn't matter. Is that fine? So because now we are lagging behind one session, in fact. So now let us.
In some section we can postpone tomorrow also.
In the afternoon session, yeah. Because quality discussion is happening. So I don't want to really disturb this quality discussion, because that's why brainstorming we have written. Okay. Pankaj, I hope you are not disappointed.
No, my question was always like this. Nobody would like to answer that happened yesterday as well.
No, Pankaj, we are actually.
But it's not about you. I know your work actually. I have read some of your books. Actually, these are hard political questions which no one wants to talk about in Odisha, and that is very disheartening. I mean, I'm not saying him or.
No, we all agree with this. I think there is no dispute.
If I agree with, there is no answer.
He doesn't have either answer.
No.
He doesn't have also
I have,
answer.
like I have lot of
Yeah.
commonality the way he does. But look, this should be the topic of our discussion. Because
Yes.
people should be at the center of the
Yeah. So at least before lunch we can have.
Amrita,
Professor
just
Keshav Das.
one
Yes.
minute. I think I agree with everything you said, Pankaj. We don't have any difference,
Yes.
either
Yes,
theoretical or ideological differences.
So
But
it-
my
it-
only
it-
difference with on regional
it's going
question,
live though.
territoriality is a colonial construction. If you read Dalton's work, Dalton is a historian who constructs identity based on regions. And if you read my latest article in Journal of Asian and African Studies, I argue that neoliberalism constantly reconstructs identities based on territoriality. So that's my fundamental problem with regional questions, whether it is Scotland or Western Odisha.
No, that might be the problem, but it is happening. We have to address it. It's no disagreement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, ideologically you are correct. But is that somebody else?
Okay. So, Bhavan, you can stay here tonight. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So now we move on to the next presentation, next chapter by Professor Keshav Das. That is roots of economic retrogression in colonial Odisha. Over to you, sir. You want to show PPT?
No. Thank you so very much. In fact, I'm quite, very honestly speaking, I'm absolutely overwhelmed by both the Nayaks.
Another inquiry in the
So just absolutely overwhelmed by their analysis, by their sort of breadth of knowledge and the way they have covered these issues. And I'm actually finding myself in a very peculiar situation because I think my title is little too heavier than what I actually would be saying. So I'll be talking about the roots of economic retrogression in colonial Odisha. But I think, hats off to them. I think they have really covered very wide-ranging issues, and they have provoked us. And I sort of salute their scholarship. With that, sort of very briefly, let me also sort of say that this is what I'll be presenting right now is something which is sort of based on my PhD work, which I did many years back. And there was a special chapter on roots of economic backwardness of Odisha. So that's how this sort of whatever presentation draws from there. And there are two things I wish to say, like to make things a little simpler. So one is relating to the geographies. So I'm using geographies as a plural, actually, it's two spaces and not just places. So by spaces, about which again, the earlier speakers have sort of indicated, that's a kind of, and also one of the participants did mention that there has been this kind of a very clear, if you take two very broad geographies, that is the sort of, if you take, let's say, the coastal Odisha, for instance, and the inland Odisha, the differences have been there for ages, and many of them have actually roots in the kind of local institutions that govern them, actually. So even if you are talking about the colonial regime and 1803 as kind of a starting point for the colonial or the British time, we also know that there's a large number of what you may call as pre-existing vulnerabilities sort of remain, whether they can be attributed to the ecology of the place, which also meant that in terms of connectivity, probably that was not a kind of a preferred region, and also very highly fragmented sort of polity of the inland region in particular. Like I'm sort of referring to the feudatory states, so there are 26 odd such states, which are very different in terms of their local governance. But that is also the region which was at the center of attraction of the colonial rule, who were sort of looking for, particularly by the late, let's say, 19th century, 1890s, 1880s onwards, particularly when they wanted to promote both the irrigation facilities in sort of certain regions and also the railways. And again, the points which have already been mentioned. And for this, the British definitely was looking forward to a massive sort of input of certain kinds of raw materials, whether it was coal, whether it was sort of timber, and also to an extent even steel. So with this kind of a background, like Odisha's like position, as I said, these two geographies, one very well connected because of the Madras presidency and the Bengal presidency, sort of having a rail line and are making a world of difference there. The kind of land systems we had, particularly you had this Jamindari systems, which was essentially absentee landlordism. And when the British sort of like takes over the scene, it's actually emphasis on extracting certain kinds of natural resources and also to extract revenue from the land. And as Jatin sir also mentioned before, that the land as a kind of a commodity, irrespective of what happens to your sort of production, that became actually one of the dominant sort of, let's say, burdens on the local society. So if you sort of see the focus on, let's say, the broader eastern region, so the plunder of eastern region, which has been very widely documented, which included Bengal, Bihar, and especially Odisha, that had already sort of started. And this also, there was this massive demand on the land revenue, which in fact kept increasing. So I have some data which I will not be able to. Let me just quickly sort of mention a few things. On the eve of the British occupation of Odisha in 1803, the land revenue system, being complex admixture of nature of the native, Mughal, and the Maratha systems, sort of presented a picture of distortion and confusion. However, even the excessive coercive method which sort of was used by the British, that led to a kind of an, let's say, between 1804 and 1826. So there has been a massive increase in the net collection of the land revenue from something like 1,284,000 to 1,485,000 rupees. And this also meant that there are sort of very little resources left for investment in certain kinds of local industries, in which Odisha probably was doing somewhat better. And that is also the time you have a kind of emphasis given on what is known as the East India Irrigation Canal Company. And this, for a moment, sort of rose the hopes of at least those who own land, that there will be a kind of a multiplication of their sort of the farming itself. That is, they will have probably farming more than once in a year, and there could be multi-cropping. But as it so happened that halfway through this program of irrigation, sort of building irrigation dams, so the government, in fact, sort of lost interest in the project. And what happened was, like, you had several irrigation projects which remained incomplete, and you had a kind of a monocropping, which was essentially sort of centered around rice. So that is what sort of continued, and the irrigation, in fact, was not quite helpful at all. And at the same time, if you are sort of looking into sort of trade and commerce during, let's say, the 19th century, and also up to almost middle of the 20th century, so that you find that there has been a kind of a decline in trade, and particularly the only exports that we are sort of doing were sort of relating to certain kinds of primary produce, for instance, coal and coke, rice, hide and skin, bones, manganese, pig iron, and iron ore. So these were actually kind of essentially sort of unprocessed raw materials and natural resources, which were sort of increase in sort of exports from Odisha, and particularly between 1916 to 1941. So this also meant that there was very little sort of industry which was sort of based on local resources had been promoted, and there is very little data, in fact, on the entire mineral economy of the feudatory states, for instance. So this is one of the least understood and least researched information, as Amalandu knows about that we have very little information, but somehow through some archival sort of research, I sort of found some information on the Gangpur state records, which sort of suggests the very interesting point about between, let's say, 1914 and 1945, that is between the two wars. So there has been massive exports of manganese, dolomite, and limestone from this, particularly only from this Gangpur state, about which we have records. So what we have not really sort of, apart from our political economy analysis, I think what we sort of actually need to focus on what happened to the resources. So one is the absolute resource outflow from these areas, meaning thereby you had very little opportunity to process them within, despite certain kinds of skills available. That was one part. And the second thing was, like, these are also many of these things which got processed externally, they came back and sort of we had to purchase at a high price. So this entire mining sector, I would sort of emphasize in fact my chapter. That's what one of these points that I want to emphasize. So this is one of the most sort of untouched part of the economic history of Odisha, and that is one of the roots of like retrogression of the local economy, because it also meant that a large number of local population who are dependent on some of these resources and also were sort of engaged in certain kinds of processing, as you are mentioning. So many of them had to, so this outmigration from this region, which we are seeing even today, from, let's say, the KBK region to several other sort of, let's say, urban areas in the country. So these were very much the fact, even during, like whether they went to Rangoon, whether they went to Calcutta, but then, or whether they came to even Cuttack. So there was a massive outmigration from these areas, because their local resources on which basis their like income was dependent, they were destroyed. And also it had got a lot to do with the kind of governance system you had with the feudatory states. With that, there are sort of two, there is some information we have, for instance, this is sort of recorded by Cobden Ramsay, who has sort of documented the feudatory states. So still, you had certain kinds of activities like brass utensils making, tussar cloth, silk and cotton cloth, the blacksmithery, ivory-based work, silversmithery, and soapstone utensils. So there was still, so you cannot say that there was no sort of industrial or enterprise base during the colonial period, but then the systematic destruction of these resources also meant that many of them sort of declined during this period. And there are two specific sort of industries which have been mentioned by many historians. One relates to the cotton textiles, in which actually we had an advantage, but then the British government, in fact, sort of imposed very high taxes on our imports of cotton from Nagpur, which also meant that the cotton textile which was manufactured within Odisha, in which we had a skill, fairly strong skill base, as we see even today, the entire weaving sector was actually destroyed by a certain policy of increasing what you call the taxes on the raw material that we are importing, and it also led to a situation by which we probably were forced to import a sort of cheaper cloths from UK, and that is one of the sort of industries which really got destroyed. The second industry in which we had some advantage was actually the salt industry. And again, as far as Jitan sir mentioned, that this was again one sort of particular product in which we had an advantage, but then the government actually took monopoly over that, and it is the Madras presidency, and as part of which Ganjam was part of the Madras presidency. So the entire sort of salt monopoly, in the sense of how much salt to be produced, at what price it is to be sold, and where it is to be sold, and this was all sort of decided by the British government. So which also meant that there was a huge restriction on salt production, which was one of the sort of, because of the long coastline, which was one of the sort of, let's say, enterprises we had, so that got destroyed. These are the two sort of industries which have been sort of mentioned, cotton textiles and salt industry, which were, you can say, somewhat modern which had a growing demand. So these were destroyed. The entire base of the natural resource centric enterprises, they were destroyed because of the exploitation of local resources. So with that, so you have by 1948, since when you actually get the annual survey of industries data, which is the sort of data on the organized sector. So that data, if you see for Odisha, so you have a very sort of sad, what should I say, like if you say take data from 1923 to 1947, that is the earliest for which we have information for the sort of what you may call as the organized sector or relatively larger enterprises. So they are sort of mostly concentrated in railway workshops. That was one major sort of industries, coach building, electricity generation, and then we had rice mills, sugar factories, breweries and distilleries, and and there are some tanneries, of course, and the printing presses. So these are some of the sort of low value adding activities that you had. So by the turn, let's say by around 1947 or 1950, let's say, so our industrial sort of base or the enterprise base on which the local economy would have survived, that had been largely destroyed because of the very high land revenue and the zamindari system, which did not pay attention to productivity and multi-cropping, and the exploitation of a variety of resources, and particularly a large number of mineral resources, which I'm sort of emphasizing, the large number of minor minerals, particularly, so which the outflow of which also destroyed the opportunities for local enterprises. So by 1950s, or even as you come almost up to 1990s, you still have the industrial sector, despite having all the whatever rich resources of minerals. So you have an industrial sector which actually suffered because it did not at any point sort of contribute to building what you may call as a local entrepreneurship. It did not contribute to sort of demanding for certain kinds of infrastructure, like whether the Jakpura Bangsapani railway line, if you know, for sort of decades, it never came through because you always, in a federal setup, you always had an argument against having a railway system which is part of the central government project, that you never wanted to have a railway line because it was not going to be profitable or commercially viable for the railways. You had a huge plan by the 1960s, early 1963. You had a sort of grand sort of proposal to sort of build 19 sort of large cargo berths in Paradip port, and sort of like this is both the port and the railway line which would have connected the eastern and the western part of Odisha. So these were systematically neglected through the what you may call as the centralized federal polity that actually governed us. So what has happened at no point, sort of, because if the moment you are sort of seeing Odisha as these two geographies, that is one, the coastal so-called what Pankaj was mentioning as the Patnaiks Odisha, and the non-Patnaiks Odisha actually. So if you sort of see it as two different forms of institutions and governance, you see that there was hardly ever a kind of a pan-Odisha sentiment in terms of, sort of developing the whole state. So that division has actually perpetuated, and unless we address that, I think the divisive politics will always work, and maybe by 2036, we still will have the KBK region in that state. You still may find a large number of people migrating out of distress, and you still may find that the polity is dominated by the Patnaiks, and very little investment in certain kinds of, let's say, economic infrastructure, including in banking, including in electricity, including in internet, will be available in many of these regions that we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes.
Very nice, fascinating presentation. And just to, not to question, but to aid, if anything, that if you feel that can be added to this. The question is that
1803 we should start, or still we can go back a little earlier to this. Why I'm saying this is, it's 1757, this Battle of Plassey, that's which transited the East India Company from a merchant to a merchant ruler, right? So that is, in some sense, quite an important point. But I'm not saying that we should kind of go back to the history for that reason. The point is that Lord Clive had his assistant, Thomas More, I think we call him. Moat or Mote, how? Moat. So Thomas More, in 1766, he traveled to Hirakud in search of diamonds. So Hirakud was actually Hirakud in that sense, a diamond dealer. So he travels in 1766. So what it makes is that the traveler, I think that has been a quite a East India Company style, that when they acquire a place, they have appointed a person to kind of enumerate the place in some ways. Francis Buchanan did it in after Tipu's territory was taken. Francis Buchanan traveled from Madras to Mysore to Malabar, and Thomas More 1766 does that from Kolkata to Hirakud. And the first thing is that there is a mining and industry component associated with that is the diamond, which is the most important way to, because Lord Clive possibly had accumulated enough resources in that work, because Jagat Seth was sponsored it. So he wanted to convert it to a certain form which is easy to carry. So it's not gold or not silver, but diamond would make it. So that is one of the main objective of More to come to Odisha. But what happens is that in the process, it describes the kind of system that he has seen. And as Dr. Nayak was telling, the land was not the criteria. In fact, Jamindars were alluring the peasants to come and work in their specific lands with a taxation system which was kind of completed. Somebody is asking for 1/4, somebody is saying 1/3, then taking the people out. So it's kind of a labor was an important component to this process. And some of these details are actually there when he travels from Baleswar, Cuttack, and he goes to through both the route to up to Hirakud. So maybe I don't know. I want to push you to 1803 to 1766, but if you would like to kind of go back to that part, it may give a very fascinating starting point for us. And the second one that I was about to talk to you about was about salt, which is a very, very important component of it. It started somewhere around 1860s or the Francis Day when he traveled around this place basically to government all over the country. And in fact, he had a very structured questionnaire format. Francis Day formed a set of questions, sent it to all the provinces, and requested them that you get it from all your collectors, that is the Europeans, and the Tahsildars, natives. So the questionnaire data was collected from collectors and natives. So he was in that sense little egalitarian, but quite a structured questionnaire he formed, and the appendix is quite rich. The report may be smaller, but the appendix is quite rich. There he talks about Odisha, and some of the points in later work he says that salt going for dry fish requires quite a bit of salt. So he was saying that please don't tax dried fish for salt for drying fish drying, because it is kind of adversely impacting. So there is a question of food and nutrition security associated with that, and which means there is no linear particular view also about that all the colonial ideas were similar. Of course, revenue extraction from salt was there, but there are debates and discrepancies within the group also. Maybe that is another point. That is Francis Days over. Both I have access to, so I can share the links with you later. Just in case if you would like to add those dimensions to it.
Well, good points. In fact, I'm not very sure how far back I can go, but I think anything to do with, like, particularly your point about the diamonds part, I think that, and in fact, there is also quite some anecdotal history, which we sort of get only from some of the newspapers of that time. This whole question of the precious and semi-precious stones in Western Odisha.
Becoming later a big hub for all the precious stones.
Yes. So that part I think definitely I'll look into. And the salt, it is actually more to do with a kind of a control over the salt that was being manufactured in Odisha actually, and what sort of they kind of use an expression called taida. It's a kind of a order coming from the British government that how much you can actually manufacture, and this was mostly sort of mostly to be sent to the Calcutta market, and so that actually uh, so that restriction was there. At the same time, they started importing cheap salt from Liverpool. So that was the other way by which so the local producers so they are not able to compete either in terms of the production control and also the cheaper imports that you had from Liverpool. So essentially saying that this was one industry which could have taken over because of a long coastline. But then that was also but this part I did not know that for the dried fish they had a different kind of a policy that part.
So we have hypothesized that there may be a conspiracy when the local adoption method would be that taking salt through dried fish.
Okay.
But we have to explore it.
ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ କଥା ସାର୍ କେତେବେଳେ ଦେଖିବେ ଉତ୍କଳ ଦୀପିକାରେ ବାହାରିଛି ଗୋଟେ ଆଡଭର୍ଟାଇଜମେଣ୍ଟ କଠଉ ଫ୍ୟାକ୍ଟ୍ରି ମାନେ ଅତି ବେଶୀର ପ୍ରଡକ୍ସନଟା କଠଉ that was the level of industrial development ଯେ କଠଉର manufacture was one of the enterprises that they think of engaging in. Sir, another point is that you have taken like mining industry and land, but that time tourism may be the major issue. That point you have not taken, but if you consider, you can add some point that will also do.
I'm not very sure whether the British time there's a tourism as an industry. I'm not sure. I'm
Jagannath temple. Spiritual.
Pilgrimage may have
Many
been
of
there.
them actually conducted their funerals before they came to Jagannath temple. They knew that many of them won't return. So that wasn't tourism. It's a very dangerous kind of tourism. You come and die.
Okay.
The administration and managing of temple deliberately they didn't talk because they realized somewhere I actually read that they realized these OEA people are so religious, so you can kill them. Somehow they like to be killed, but you cannot touch their God.
They tried.
For that they will kill the people.
No, they tried.
They tried.
They were defeated legally. Odias would have died happily. Bothered about Jagannath. It's actually Madhusudan that they lost a court case. When the king of Odisha was transported or deported to Andaman, in Puri, nobody bothered. They were worried about whether they could kill monkeys. So don't have that exaggerated notion about Odias. And Jagannath temple was always a huge source of revenue. Even actually the Muslims are happy. We think that sometimes the Pandas conspire to take Jagannath away so that the revenue dry up, the Muslims will give them more money, bring them back, because they used to earn so much money out of it. Even Marathas also imposed pilgrim tax. It had nothing to do with religion. The missionaries opposed the British government imposing pilgrim tax. Pilgrim. Otherwise, the people didn't really bother. Do you think really people kill themselves or die if just something happens to Jagannath temple? No. If that tree goes out of water, then I'll commit suicide.
Now this telling us
No. Don't have that illusion. Nothing
Okay,
happens.
sir, I have one observation. I mean, recently this all mega drive to bring in more investment. So they have this tagline, join Jagannath. Since Jagannath issue has come up, so I'm like mentioning Jagannath. So this very idea of Jagannath is like Marx used it first to describe 1857 thing. So Jagannath was like anything that comes below it will be like smashed, but the Ratha will go on.
Yes.
So how do you see? I mean, when you writing about industrialization of Odisha, so this is the vision of the power elite, join the Jagannath, and the kind of strategy they are adopting is obviously mineral-based industrialization. And whatever in the basically mineral areas, whatever infrastructure is developed in the last 20 years, are all to ensure that minerals are extracted through those areas. So this is like this town as development. So So in Kasipur, when I was there in Kurapura, I traveled that area. Actually, road came 10 years before that the mining came there. And it was told to them that no, this is nothing going to happen, this is just. But after 10 years, what they see is mining, and not only mining with again, kind of industrialization we have. We have not only a capitalism. Capitalism comes along the the gods. Brahminism that we call in literature. So not only like disposing them from their immediate livelihoods, but again their culture, everything. So that also coming into the analysis when we are writing this.
In fact, I maybe I have one more presentation tomorrow. So that will for the post independence period. So there I'll be talking a little bit about what you are saying. But one thing is very clear that this extractive industry based development also at some point has sort of helped the narrative of, let's say, most economists who always were feeling a little down, like people like you and me, people from Odisha, that we have remained a kind of a backward or a kind of a, we are not an advanced state, or we are in the bottom 3 or 4 states. When we did a little better in the 70s and the 80s, like we sort of moved a little above Bihar, so we are a little happy that at least there is someone else below us. And now is a time when we are sort of making a lot of emphasis on that we have moved to be one of the middle income states. So this has, because there is a popular aspiration to move up in the economic sort of like growth ladder, so that is only fed through the extractive industries. In fact, there is a report which is I think it is sort of not made public. This is brought out by the PwC, so this is a report which is talking about a kind of a 5 trillion economy. The Odisha will be in another by whatever 2030, and this is a report which is now grounded. Some people have got access to that. It is a report grounded because this entirely talks about that. Essentially, you have nickel, for instance. You have very sort of high valued mineral resources. So this, if you are sort of like giving access to the private capital, whether domestic or foreign, so they are going to make it. So, and to the extent you feel excited about that you have sort of moved to the middle level, and you are not worried about the distribution of gains, you are not worried about the high level of distress migration. I think our industrialization story, we have to really bring back once more talking about the smaller enterprises, actually, whatever you call the MSMEs and the rural sort of sector. And within that, we may have to talk in terms of certain kinds of infrastructure, like as I mentioned about roads or electricity, internet, and in newer ways of marketing products, even from the traditional sector, which actually I'll be talking a little bit tomorrow. So I think there is a real need to rethink that employment generation or kind of a sustainable industrialization. Even in the global sort of like industrial policy, they are now concerned about the SDGs, actually, that the local ecology is not disturbed and sort of uses local knowledge, local resources. I think that narrative has to be brought back, instead of sort of making the starting point that we have moved from a lower income this thing to a middle income bracket. I think so that helps the Jagannath to come in, actually.
So I think we'll stop here during the lunch to ask the question. So we'll break for the lunch. There is a mutton meals, so that will be
there may be vegetable.
ମଟନ ହଉ କି ଯାହା ହଉ ମାନେ ଭାତଟା ଭାତ ଭଳିଆ ହେଇଛି ନା ଚାଉଳ ଅଛି
ଆପଣ ବୟସ୍କ ହେଲା ପରେ ଏଇ ସବୁ ପ୍ରୋବ୍ଲେମ ଆସେ ଆଉ. Okay, so let us break for the lunch.
Thank you.
And we'll come back here by as soon as possible.
ଆମେ ଗୋଟେ ସେସନ ପଛରେ ଅଛେ
What a session pass.
ଗୋଟେ ସେସନ
Okay, we'll have a photo session in front of our building, and then we'll go for lunch. Yes, we can leave our bags here.
हाँ